Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast, where faith meets the real struggles of life. I'm Jesse Enniss. We're diving in today into a topic that feels all too familiar to many of us. You might call it burnout. Whether you're in ministry, whether you're working a demanding job, or you're just trying to juggle the responsibilities of daily life, burnout can creep in quietly at first, but then all at once, it feels like. It's not just about being tired. Burnout is about feeling depleted physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's that sense of like standing on empty all the time with nothing left to give. And here's the thing. Burnout isn't just a modern problem. It's been a part of the human condition for as long as we've been trying to balance our doing with our being. I want to start with a story that might sound familiar to most of you. It's the story of Elijah, one of the great prophets of the Old Testament. Elijah had just experienced an incredible victory. He called down fire from heaven in front of the prophets of Baal. And what happens next? He runs. He hides in the wilderness, sits down under a broom tree and prays to die. Elijah, he's the hero of Mount Carmel, but he was burned out. And what does God call him to do? What does God do? God sends an angel not to chastise him, not to give him a to-do list, but to bring him food and let him rest. And I think we need to hear that, especially as those who are, some of us who are pastors, some of us who are lay members, all of us believers, we need to hear that it's not just about the things that God calls us to do. What's most important a lot of times is the times that God calls us to rest. What do you think about that, John?
100%. And that's a hard thing to listen to for a lot of reasons, because so many things can get in the way. We can go, you know what? My boss is not going to hear I'm burned out for a legitimate reason. What they're going to hear are excuses, right? So you kind of swallow it. And that's just one example, but there's hundreds of others of little situations that make us hedge and go, maybe I'm not burned out. Maybe I'm okay. Maybe everything will be okay. I got a vacation coming up 6 months from now.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be fine. But it's never fine. It's just not.
And we cope, I think. We lean on different things, different people, substances, just to try to get through that next day. But I don't think we're meant to be that way. I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be.
No, we can't. We're not meant to. We have these bodies that God gave us are remarkable, but they're not made to redline for extended periods of time.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Too many of us have been redlining now for quite some time, and that's just not going to work. It's not going to work. In Elijah's story, it's a good reminder that the best of us, no matter who we are, hit a wall, and it's usually physically mixed with emotionally. It's usually that moment where you're like, because so many of us are physically tired, but it's that moment where your physical tired meets your emotional tired. You just kind of, okay, I'm out. We can explore what some of the burnout looks like and maybe help some people recognize a burnout, because a lot of us aren't trained to recognize burnout for burnout. We mistake it for something else, laziness or bad habits or whatever it is. But there's wisdom in the scriptures that I think can help us.
Always. I think too, this is probably a really good time to have this conversation early in the year, when a lot of us are probably still thinking about our New Year's resolutions and might be beating ourselves up for dropping some of them already. Yeah, I think this is a really poignant conversation. So let's start with a definition. Burnout, because burnout is more than just being tired, as you've already alluded to, John. It's a state of chronic stress that leads to emotional exhaustion, detachment, and a loss of a sense of accomplishment. It's feeling like you're running on fumes. And even the things that once brought you joy feel like a chore now. Here's the thing. Burnout doesn't discriminate. Clergy, teachers, parents, health workers, we're all susceptible. Whoever you are, if you are under the sound of my voice right now, you are susceptible to burnout. And in ministry, burnout can feel especially isolating because we often feel like we're supposed to have it all together. I think one of the interesting things about church is that, sometimes when you volunteer to do a thing, that thing becomes your thing for a very, very
Yeah.
long time. And a lot of us are so afraid of letting our church down, letting the other members down. And so we're all susceptible to it. So even if it's not like particularly a part of your job, a lot of us who are part of the church feel we also serve in the church, and that can get to the level of feeling like a job. And so in ministry, wherever it is, burnout can feel especially isolating. And it's sad when you feel isolated from your church because we feel like we're supposed to have it all together.
Yeah, and then you don't feel appreciated. That isolation leads to feeling unappreciated and distant, and it creates a feedback loop, and the burnout really becomes, then the bitterness starts to get in, and then all that, you get angry for reasons that why did I get so angry at that one thing. There's so many little signs that we mistake for anything else other than the fact that we're cooked. So that seems to be the absolute last thing that we are willing to admit. We're willing to even say, I'm in a terrible mood, or I hate it when people do whatever they did that ticked us off. The last thing we're saying is, man, that was an unnecessary reaction. I must be burned out. I don't know why, but it's just a taboo. I suppose maybe is a good word for it.
Maybe.
But we should, as the church, we should be ahead of this game. Too often we're behind. But we should be way out ahead of rest.
Yeah.
As not just God's demand, which it is, not just what God did, so that we should do like God. Both of those are good reasons. But because we just don't function without it.
So true. So true.
We lie to ourselves and say, yes, we do. No, you don't. You have what you have are examples of times where you have gotten away with it. Right? That's in our heads. We're like, oh man, but I stayed up for 3 days straight and I studied for whatever. And you got away with one there, but you know what could have happened on day 2? Exactly. Something terrible could have happened and you would have just lost it because you had no sleep and you had right? Yeah, you did get away with that. That's not a reason to do it again. Right? That's not a burnout's not real. Burnout is just giving up.
Yeah. And there are times where life does call for pushing yourself. Absolutely. But it can't be a lifestyle. Cannot be.
No, and you're more so. And another thing is, sometimes we push ourselves too hard, and we do it. We have our victory, or we do it, or whatever, and we walk away thinking, "Man, I did. We did it. That's amazing. I can't believe I did it." And in our minds, we're not thinking about how many people in my wake had to suffer because I'm burned out and insisted that I could do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's when you get you hear people just losing their cool, right? In the middle of something, you can hear it, right? The preacher or the music director or somebody on the headset, whoever just loses it, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, not cool.
Yeah.
Right? Because that brings everybody else down, but then they're not willing to admit, guys, I'm just burned out. I'm sorry.
You're losing it on your team. Burnout might be the issue.
Say it again, Jesse.
I mean, I've been a part of teams where it went from 0 to 100 and real quick. And I'm like, okay, I feel like I missed something in the buildup here, but no, it's just we're dealing with our internal struggles.
Or not dealing.
Exactly.
It just comes out.
Internal struggles, and yeah, a lot can happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
John Wesley, we have in our denomination, in our tradition, we have John Wesley, who was famous for these, ups and downs, right? And these huge changes, and he developed over the years, I was going to say forced, but pretty forced routine of insisting he got rest, and that the clergy that he was overseeing also got rest. That became a very, very important part of his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But he would burn himself out, right? And you can see it in the journals, right? You see him going right up here and then just, oh, you burned out, man.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like, even with pushing this idea of the importance of rest, just because you know better doesn't mean that you always do better or you do what it takes for you to be in a good space.
Or you're willing to give that advice to others.
Exactly.
But then you don't.
But you don't live into it yourself. Absolutely. I mean, speaking as a pastor, absolutely. And it's such a countercultural idea, which I was going to allude to earlier. It's that we feel like rest is a luxury. Rest is not a luxury. Rest is a necessity. Even God rested on the seventh day. And we know that you've heard that story over and over again, and it might just become, it just blends in with the furniture at this point. But God rested on the seventh day, not because God needed to, but to model something essential for us. And yet, here we are, not God, thinking that we can burn the candle at both ends. Like, we are mortal, we are fallen, we are, we are not infinite.
No, and we're of this world. Yes,
Exactly.
we have divine breath in us, but we're made cyclical like this world. You and I were talking earlier, and I'm not going to steal thunder because I can't wait for you to talk about it, that we are, as Americans, we've become very good at figuring out how to work all year round as much as humanly possible.
Yep.
That seems to be, we have a lot of things designed around keeping that true. We've got energy drinks, and we've got so many things.
Entire industries
are around just keeping you going. That you getting tired, feeling burned out, have a Red Bull, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, instead of going the other direction with it, of going, hey, we might want to slow down. It's possible we were not made to go 24/7.
What do they say? Red Bull gives you wings. You've got 4-hour energy. You got Monster. We've got lots of Starbucks fans out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much to
and that whole lifestyle then leads to forcing in your downtime, your recreation time, and then your recreation time gets more and more extreme because you have to fit it into smaller and smaller windows to compensate for more and more work. It's not sustainable.
Well, and the thing we were talking about earlier too is that the rest of the world, although we might not approve of what the rest of the world is doing, the rest of the world doesn't see it that way necessarily. We've got our folks in Scandinavian countries, those Northern European countries who, they take a lot more vacation than we do. They take off a lot more, like a lot bigger chunks of time, but then they also take like multiples of those chunks of time as well. My wife spent a good amount of time in Finland. Her family is Finnish. And while she was studying in Finland, there were times where, she had to get her papers in at a certain time because her professor was going on vacation again after just coming back from vacation. And then I come from a more Caribbean background where, things are a lot more laid back. Everyone goes home early on Fridays. I mean, it's just, it's just kind of like the nature of things. Whereas I've worked with folks from the Caribbean in the US and, are just constantly hearing the grumbles on Friday, like, man, we should have been home by now. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
absolutely.
I think Americans kind of experience, especially from the Caribbean's perspective, experience that when they're on vacation. They're like, oh yeah, these guys are really laid back. Like, this is not a vacation for them. This is a daily life thing for them. They're always
100%. Yeah. And it mirrors that creation is cyclical. We have seasons. Everything is cyclical. They have rest periods and rejuvenation periods. And when I first got into ministry, I met a guy who was in the tool industry a long time ago, and his company had this brand new idea for, I think it was jet ski. It was a particular engine or type, but they needed somebody to manufacture it. So they went, I guess the best fit was an Italian company. So they go over to Italy and they talk and they kind of get out this deal. And then at the very end, they go, but we can't start until, I think it was like September. And it was like February or something like that. And so he kind of, why?
Yeah.
Said, oh, we don't work during the summer.
Yeah.
And he talked about that being one of the most profound moments in his entire life, because it shook everything he thought he knew about everything.
Yeah. Why would you halt production just to take time off? Like,
because in our country, everything revolves around work. Whatever your money making, whatever your job is, everything has to revolve around that.
Yeah. And even when you're on vacation, the thing keeps going. And so you end up not really being on vacation, because a lot of times you're the only person who knows how to keep the thing going 100%. And so you will get a call, you will get an email.
Or it'll be a disaster when you get back because they tried to keep it going without you. Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes everything needs to come to a halt, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we need to be okay with that. We need to give space for that. And to your point, I mean, the world is cyclical. The rest of creation gets that we need to stop at some point, that things need to change, that the things that we had access to before, we won't have access to for a while. And it's funny that you brought up that person, because my father-in-law has had a similar story about wanting to work with different companies in Europe. I mean, he works from Finland. He talks about working with folks from Spain, and you cannot reach them during a certain time of the day, because
I love that.
They're all on their siesta and they will not stop.
And we mock it. It's in so many of our like movies and TV shows that calling it that, and we kind of, I don't know, we put it down really and make fun of it a little bit.
We do. Like, how dare they take all that time off in the middle of the day? But it's important to them. It's important to them.
How dare they rest?
Yeah.
Don't they know there's money to be made?
They know.
And that's so. Before I went to seminary, right out of college, I got a job as an engineering headhunter. So I was calling people, and trying to get them to switch jobs over another one and making contracts and stuff. It's whatever it is. And it was a very small company. It was just me and the woman who kind of invented it, created this company. And we got into this craziest argument because she didn't understand why I wasn't working weekends. She didn't ask me to. There was never any but she finally came to me and she goes, I really don't understand you. And I went, what? She goes, you don't have a family, you don't have a wife, you don't have kids right now, you're not in school, you just graduated, you should be working around the clock. This should be your time where you are nonstop working to get your career going because you can. Yeah. I didn't last much longer there, but obviously, because she and I just did not connect on this level of killing yourself for the job. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that too, because I had a situation, because growing up Christian, once I started working, there were a couple of non-negotiables. I will tithe from what I make, and I will take Sundays off. First job, Chick-fil-A, easy.
That's built in.
Right? Baked into the system. Started working at a grocery store, and they're like, you can't take Sundays off. That's our busiest day. And I'm like, hey, when I first started, when I had my interview, I told y'all that was a non-negotiable for me. I cannot work Sundays. And so we need to make a decision right now, because we're not going to have this conversation again. Either you want me to work here and I don't work Sundays, or you want me to work Sundays and I don't work here. So sometimes, especially in a culture like this, we have to make those things clear. And as Christians, it should be a regular part of our practice to be different from everybody else.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes people will appreciate that, and sometimes they won't. But we're not looking.
I think we leaned a little too hard into the Christian work ethic, which is wonderful. But we failed to realize that it's not sustainable unless you rest.
Yeah.
We just get mesmerized by all the productivity.
Is it Christian if we don't rest?
Is it Christian if you don't rest?
If it's not of God, is it Christian? And God is of rest. So if it's not of rest, I'm just doing the math. I'm not a very good
No, I
math.
got you. No, I hear you. I hear you. Well, this is a good. So one of the things we want to be doing with this podcast going forward is helping people get resources and connecting to people and getting the news out, the conference news out. And one of the things about in this vein here is the bishop and cabinet of our conference invite people to from Crossnor's Center for Trauma Resilient Communities. To invite you to learn from them about creating healing-centered churches. It's Saturday, February 8th, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can register on our conference website. It's at St. Luke's UMC in Hickory. Breakfast, lunch, and snacks will be provided. So look into that. Healing-Centered Church Summit.
Yeah, when I first started my journey towards becoming a pastor, there was a presentation from the folks at Crossnor, and I thought it was phenomenal. We talked about trauma, and I thought it was amazing. I thought they really kind of got to the heart of, what it means to kind of understand your emotions and where you're at. So I would certainly recommend this to everyone if you can be a part of it, for sure. It gives you a really good way of viewing life, and for a pastor it's great because we are responsible for pastoral care, and we have to be able to see that in our folks. But I think it's a life thing. It's an everyday thing, not just for your congregation, for yourself.
And it has deep theological foundations. It's not just about overwork. You lose connection with each other. It's just true. You just have to trust me, because in the moments when we're doing it, we don't think about how we're losing connection, but we drift away from each other. We get angrier with each other. We drift away from God, get angry with God, and we kind of isolate. And Scripture has this to say, Mark 1:35, Jesus withdraws. And it's not the only time. Away from everybody to be alone. Just I need a minute. And they're more than a minute. It's not 10 minutes away. I imagine it being quite a lot of time. But he understood the importance of stepping away. And if Jesus did, we absolutely just need to assume that we do too.
Yeah, I mean, if Jesus is supposed to be what human beings were called to be, then absolutely. And I think too, we like to talk about the story about Jesus walking on water, but do we ever preface it by the reason why Jesus wasn't with everybody else is because Jesus needed a break. He's right. Like, you guys go on ahead.
That's right. I'll be there in a minute. I'll catch up with you.
I'll catch up because I need to be alone right now.
Yes.
And we can't all walk on water and catch up, but I think it would be helpful if we would, for a moment, recognize that we all need a break and give each other space to take that break. Give each other space to be human, because if it's something that Jesus did, it's human. It's something that we need.
And it's, as Christians, we're always quick to jump in with I don't believe in that societal practice or whatever because I'm a Christian, or this or that or whatever it is. But for some reason, we don't go in with Walter Brueggemann's. The Sabbath is also resistance. It's also countering. It's also acting differently. It's just harder. That's a very dumbed down way to put it, but it is. It's just way harder culturally to look at your friends, your family, or whatever and go, I'm actually not going to work that hard.
Yeah.
Because God has told me that working myself that hard, that long, it will fail. So I need to show my resistance here. We'd much rather have our big signs up, saying Jesus loves you, or whatever our sign is that goes. That's way easier than going, you know what? I'm going to resist by not doing that. Yeah. I'm going to resist by not working that hard.
So I think one of the things I love about what you're saying is that rest is not our reward.
Right.
It's a part of the regular rhythm of life that God created for us. And
rest is not a reward.
It's not a reward. Even if Jesus needed, like we've said, even Jesus needed to rest. He needed to retreat. And so if Jesus needed to, the Prince of Peace needed time for peace, how much more do we need it? And it used to be very much a part of our culture, right? It used to be something that we did. I can't remember what it's called, something about blue code laws or something like that. But anyway, there was a time in American history where everything was closed on Sundays.
Oh, yeah.
Where you would get strange looks from your neighbors if you were mowing the lawn on Sunday.
I got yelled at once for doing that.
It used to be a thing. And so, but that's all fallen by the wayside.
Now it's just Chick-fil-A.
Now it's just Chick-fil-A holding down the fort.
And then now, my favorite thing is we put Chick-fil-A up on this pedestal because they don't open on Sundays and they don't work on Sundays. And then we go somewhere else.
Yeah.
To another restaurant and make somebody else work.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, to your point, like we are, even if we decide that we're going to take our rest by not cooking or whatever, we're making other people work. So like, we're not even giving other people the opportunity to rest.
And that's why the day in, like you said a long time ago, that Saturday, the day before, was a day of prep. You would prepare, and that was it would feel, and I've tried to get into some of this, and it's hard because it's so countercultural to now. But there's a lot of holiness. There's a lot of growth in preparing things for Sunday.
Yes.
Not just for, as clergy, when we say that, we think, what, it's lectionary. But as just base Christians, what we need to think about is, okay, Sunday is a day where I don't need to be doing the dishes, right? I need to get that done, get everything done, so that on Sunday I'm like,
I can just enjoy.
That's right.
Enjoy the goodness of God, enjoy what God has provided. Yeah. So what do we do when we feel like we're Elijah? When we're sitting under that broom tree, ready to give up? First, we acknowledge it, right? First, we, like you said earlier, sometimes we blow up because we haven't taken the time to acknowledge the fact that we could be in a burned out state.
Listen to your body. Listen to if you react out of character, ask why.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody else does, don't go, wow, jerk. Your immediate response should be, have you slept okay?
Yeah.
How are you doing? Like, because that was not your best.
Exactly.
And that's another part of this is we're scared that when we do that nobody will see us for really being burned out. They'll see us something else. We are, and so we hide it a lot. And you can offer somebody a lot of freedom by being the one to kind of say, hey, you're tired.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
What can I do? And some people need that permission.
Exactly. Well, especially it's something so countercultural. So the first thing we do, we acknowledge it. We recognize that like burnout thrives in silence. You don't say anything. We don't say anything. We just kind of gloss over all the ways that we feel like you're not yourself. Reminds me of a Snickers commercial, but that's neither here nor there. You share your struggles with someone. Share your struggles with somebody that you trust. Someone who knows who you truly are and knows you at your best and your worst. You know, that could be a colleague, a friend, a counselor. It could be your pastor, whoever that is. Share that. And then second of all, prioritize your rest because it's not about escaping. It's about renewing. You really can't do anything else that you were created to do until you're your best self sometimes. And you need to be renewed. You wouldn't leave for the day with a phone. Well, you might. But you don't prioritize leaving for the day with a phone that's not charged, right? So make sure that you're doing that with your body. Find something that restores your soul, whether it's prayer, a walk in nature, a good book, maybe it's some sort of music. If you're in ministry, lean on your community. That's what being a part of ministry is about. God didn't design us to do this alone. That's why God designed the church. Because we were not created to do this alone.
And as such a connectional denomination, we really need to figure out how to lean on each other better.
Yes, absolutely.
And that sounds like burdening each other, but it's not. And I would fight anybody who would say otherwise. That leaning on each other. No, you have to. And we're just stronger together.
We
And
are.
we last longer, we burn out less. And also, and this is when we say prioritizing rest and whether our capabilities without rest as opposed to with rest. John Wesley kind of understood that he had this cyclical thing about him too. And if we redline all the time, and if you're out there, and I've been in this situation, okay, if you're out there right now listening and you have kind of been redlining for a while, but you figured it out, okay, you got a routine so that you can cope with your redlining. Can I just, pop your bubble as mine got popped so many times and go, you're cruising for a bruising. There's going to be a cost. That's a given. But you're also robbing yourself of all of your various abilities, because if you lean more into the rest and the cyclical nature of it, you'll find that you have times where you're more creative than other times.
Yep.
You'll find times where you're more organized than you are at other times. You'll discover that at different points in your rest cycle, you're capable of doing things maybe you never thought you were, just because you've had to redline yourself to accomplish this one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we said, I mean, there are times where redlining feels necessary. Can't be all the time. A lot of times we need to follow the regular rhythms, regular patterns of our bodies and say, okay, where's my energy level right now? Okay, my energy level is up. Maybe I need to focus on something that's high priority right now where I can focus in, I can zoom in, because I know I'm a finite person. This energy is not going to last forever. And then there are times where it's like, I'm tired. I can either do a little bit, something not so energy intensive, or I could rest and get myself into a place where I'm ready to push myself again. But like you said, cannot redline all the time. God did not.
And if there's something in your life that's requiring you to, now listen, I'm not going to tell you to quit your, like, if somebody's out there like, well, my kids make me redline, I'm with you. We're all there. But if there's something that you have put in your life, or that, an aspect, your job, friendship, a habit, whatever, that's requires you to redline all the time, you're going to miss out on all the other stuff. That red line is going to take away the joy, like you said in the very beginning, for everything else.
It is.
And you're going to think to yourself, oh, okay, well, I just don't like doing that anymore. Yeah, you do. You just are so burned out that it's not the same.
There is not a situation where you, like you said, there's not a situation where you need to redline all the time. Even if, like you said, maybe you have children, and you have young children, and of course they require everything of you. That's where your community comes in. Lean on your community for things that you can lean on your community for. Let them be community for you so that you can be everything you need to be in that moment. But you cannot be all things at all times to and for all people. Sometimes you need to take a step back.
And sometimes our egos get inflated because we keep getting told, like, oh, every time, Pastor, it's great. Or every time, you just do this amazing thing. So we think to ourselves, gosh, I don't think I need rest, or I don't need, right? I'm nailing this. People keep flattering me. Like, folks, listen, you are maybe just being flattered a bit, or they, you are great. And so they've just hit this great kind of level, but you could be capable of so much more. Like, don't let yourself get stuck. And you'll burn out. And then when you burn out, so Jesse wants to get us going in this segment to do epic fails, which I think is fantastic.
We're getting there.
And so, but today, instead of having like a concrete example, which Jesse just edited my quitting because I didn't spell it right, under epic fail, I spelled quitting wrong under epic fail. Good. We're going to bring up the subject of quiet quitting. I wouldn't say it's a new thing, but it's a new term anyways. It's been flushed out a little over the last, what do you say, decade maybe? And I think
language around something.
Right. It's solidified a little bit. And I think it's because we've redlined for so long And we have determined that, actually quitting, that actually moving on, that actually going and finding something that might be more fulfilling. We make that taboo. We say, no, don't do that. No, 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 no. And so we start to do quiet quitting.
Mm-hmm.
What is quiet quitting? Quiet quitting is you continue doing your job, but you're doing like a half effort at best.
Yeah, you mostly,
as a matter of course, not just because you're tired. You just kind of go, you know what? This job gets half my attention from now on, no matter what it is, because I'm just so burnt out and so unappreciated here. And so, you know what? now you only get 25% of my effort. That's quiet.
When something goes wrong, we're
inevitable.
Usually something will go wrong. You either don't respond at all.
Yeah, you have.
Or you respond in a way that doesn't really help the situation.
Nope.
It just kind of perpetuates this constant struggle. And then it, of course, comes back on you. And so, yes.
It loops.
If you find yourself quiet quitting, you might be experiencing burnout.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
If you're quiet quitting, you are experiencing some level of burnout. Or, now I will leave this room, you could have a terrible job. I'm going to go ahead and say that, because there's going to be people out there listening going, listen, you don't know why I'm quiet quitting. I'm quiet. I understand. There are places and situations that have very little to do with what you're bringing to the table. And that can also, this is a shout out to all you leaders. Some of your people might quiet quit if they get too overwhelmed. And quiet quitting is hard as a leader to see.
It is, and which is why it should be a regular rhythm. Again, a regular rhythm for you to be checking in on your people and making sure,
insisting they're getting real rest,
exactly,
real downtime, real time away from whatever the most stressful part of their job is. Right?
And you might be thinking, they're all adults; they can take care of themselves, and that is absolutely true. And yet, you have put yourself in the position to be a leader. And as a leader, you not only lead, but you serve. And the best way
God led it by example and taught. Jesus led by example and taught about this.
Exactly. And the best way to serve your people is to make sure that they're getting what they need. And if they need rest, you got to make space for them to not only take it, but to feel okay about taking it.
To feel like it's a part of their job.
Exactly.
It's not a break from their job. It's a part, like, getting rest away from it gets treated like taking some away time. Are you?
Yeah.
Like, listen, what I'm doing is I'm going to go restore myself so that I can do the job here back to the level that you and I both want me to.
Yeah. Let's get away from this, like, bragging about how hard we pushed ourselves and how long we've been consistent and all that. Like, consistency is great. Let's add to our consistency a consistent practice of rest.
Right. And maybe like you said, consistency, but that's base level. What did you miss out on? What level of above just getting the job done could you have achieved? Right?
Exactly. So, and that brings us back to Elijah, right? After the angel fed Elijah rested. But then God spoke to him, not in the wind, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. Burnout it's not the end of the story. It's an invitation for us to pause, for us to listen, and let God restore us. So we've talked a lot about burnout. Let's talk a little bit now about renewal. And we've done that a little bit. We sprinkle a little bit of renewal out there. But history is full of stories of people who came back from the brink. One of my favorites is about Thomas Merton, the monk, the writer. At one point, he felt utterly disconnected in his monastic life, but through prayer and reflection, he rediscovered his love for writing and saw it as a form of ministry. His words continue to inspire generations. Did you just correct my saying of his name?
No. Who would do that?
No, if you did, please do, because
that's Thomas Merton. No.
I don't want to throw the wrong name.
I think I said out. Maybe I just said out loud a personal thought, and I said I love Thomas Merton. Maybe I said it louder than I thought. I thought my heart said it.
Love Thomas Merton. It's a good thing to do.
Absolutely. And his what he's able to write about, in his post kind of out of the rat race is just some of the most beautiful
Yeah.
theology
Yeah.
about
Think about that.
rest and about being, anyways.
Think about that. Your best self could be right at the other end of burnout. When you've taken the time to rest, given yourself that time, your best self could come out on the other end of that and
What are
create.
you capable of? Go find out.
Exactly.
Get the right rest. Yeah.
And so you might have heard a lot about like resilience,
Sure.
right? It's one of those terms that gets put out there a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's essentially like our response to burnout. We want to be resilient people. We want to be people who can handle the difficulties of life. I think one of those things, if we're talking about ways that we can respond, and talking about if we're talking about the ways that we can find renewal, I think one of those things is just to have a positive but a realistic outlook, right? Don't always dwell on negative information. Maybe you need to set aside the news for a time. It is weighing on you, right? Not always, but for a time. We need to be
minimize how much you're watching. Even if you have to watch it every day, give yourself a little window.
Look for opportunities in those kind of bleak and difficult situations to find something positive. And you can't always find something positive within the negative, but if you can, take that opportunity. Sometimes if you want to be a highly resilient person, you have to have a solid sense of what you consider right and wrong. Help that to kind of guide your decisions. Like we talked about earlier, sometimes we know that burnout's not great. We know mentally that God rested on the seventh day. We know that Elijah rested, but knowing better doesn't always mean we live better. Allow yourself to be guided by these right decisions.
Yeah.
Right.
And resilient doesn't always. So in Chernobyl, where they had that big nuclear thing.
Yep. Russia.
Yeah. Almost Ukraine, unfortunately. A little present for the Ukraine. And now they call some of the species of animals that still survive in that area as resilient. They talk about how they are resilient, but you know what else they are? Radioactive.
They are. Yeah, I mean, they are alive, but are
right? They're resilient. They've survived. And I hear that a lot. Like, I'm a survivor. I'm resilient. It's like, you know what else you are? A little toxic.
Yeah.
You're a little radioactive. Yeah. Yes, your resiliency has cost. And so I would just caution you, being resilient is, like you said, it can be a positive attribute, but not careful. Right?
Not
be careful
for sure
how you use it. And maybe you are not being resilient. Maybe you're just growing radioactive.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good point. Everything needs balance.
Yes.
Everything needs balance. Just because you're a resilient person doesn't mean that you don't always need rest, right? You need rest just as much as everybody else if you're going to continue to be resilient, right?
Exactly.
Remember, we are all a part of something much greater than ourselves, right? We get to live however long of a life we get to live right now. We're called to do some incredible things through the power of God, but we are a part of something much greater than ourselves. So remember, you can't participate in this great thing if you don't have opportunities to rest so that you can have and be your best self and have a mission, have a meaning, have a purpose. But remember, rest doesn't take you away from that mission. Rest doesn't take you away from that meaning or that purpose. Rest is a part of that. It helps you to reach those goals that you're trying to reach. So I think, yeah, we recognize that at one point, Thomas Merton recognized that he was feeling disconnected, but he had his practices. He had his morals about him. He had these things that, made him resilient. Once he found that rest, though, he had an opportunity to live into those things fully.
Well, yeah, and that rest and perspective is probably the other thing we should mention here is that, and the Bible is just, cover to cover, all it talks about is you got to figure out how to see this right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
constantly like, hey,
Yeah.
your perspective is just kind of small. It's a little one-sided. So God's like, you gotta I need you to turn your head a little. And sometimes if we're redlining and we don't rest and we're not getting these cycles, we're gonna miss that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for me, it's one of the things that I heard earlier on in seminary that really stuck with me is that we as human beings are fallen and finite creatures, which means that we cannot be perfect. And we're fallen in that we cannot be perfect, and we're finite in that we cannot go forever. We have to remember those limitations about what makes us human.
Yeah. And lean into them instead of resisting them
Lean into
hard.
Lean into them.
You need sleep. You don't need a Red Bull. What you need is to close your eyes and dream. How many times has God talked to people in dreams? And yet we are some of the most sleep deprived people on the planet. It's a remarkable. We don't rest as much as other, and yet the Bible's constantly talking about rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. All right. So are we strangely warming our hearts now? Is that
we have phased out. So I want to talk about hurricane relief just really quick. We have phased out of our emergency time period, although there are still some areas I understand that are in rough shape. But as we move into mission trips and long-term care, long-term feeding arrangements, quickly, I just kind of wanted to give us a picture here. We have collected and delivered an estimated 2 million plus bottles of water, fed thousands of people, delivered diapers, formula to people in need. We've opened facilities to provide free childcare for families, set up charging stations for Wi-Fi hotspots, access to showers and laundry facilities, distributed thousands of cleaning kits, offered hospitality and shelter for emergency personnel. We've done a lot. I wanted to take a moment to say, this might be a time to catch your breath.
Yeah.
We went from general conference to disaffiliations to annual conference to hurricane to Advent to Christmas to New Year's. We've accomplished a great deal. And in the new year, I think it's important to realize how much we accomplished. More than 600 United Methodists have signed up to complete required ERT training in our conference. We have hosted 20 teams thus far from across the nation. They're still pouring in. So as you look back, I hope you will reflect on everything you've accomplished for the hurricane relief. If you wrote a letter or sent thousands of dollars or sent an entire tractor trailer of water, take a moment. Yeah. Take a moment and reflect on what we've accomplished together and in our own individual churches. But
celebrate.
We should feel our hearts strangely warmed by what we've done so far.
I love it. I love it. Celebrate that. There's a long journey and we have to stop and rest and celebrate along the way. That's the only way we're going to make it through the next, 6-7 years of this.
Absolutely.
So,
that's right.
Pace yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. We have a God who is going to do a great work in and through us if we allow ourselves.
If you're not too tired.
Exactly. If you're not too tired. You can't be used by God if you're too tired. You just can't.
That's right. And this is something, and I was going to say this is something that my dad told me, is that one of the things about not resting, because he was really good at getting rest, maybe a little too good, but he was good at he was a pastor, is that you don't know the future. You don't know. You're thinking right now, okay, I'm kind of redlining right now, but it's okay. Like, because this happened and that's why. So you justify it. It's needed for this amount of time or whatever. So you're like in month 2 of redlining. What happens if in a week from then the matriarch and patriarch of the church die?
Yeah.
What happens if something in your family happens? What happens if it turns out somebody was embezzling money from the church and what happens if you're assuming that you're redlining for the hard stuff, but you might not know what the hard stuff is in the future. Don't you want to be there? Yeah. Don't you want to have something in the tank to be able to respond to that? And right now it feels like we go from empty tank to empty tank to empty tank.
Life is tough, y'all. Got to be ready for it. And we don't always know what's coming. So remember, burnout doesn't have to be the end of the story. It's a signal. It's not a verdict. When we feel depleted, God meets us with rest, grace and renewal. Remember, we don't know what's ahead, but God knows what's ahead, which is why God is calling us to have regular rhythms of rest right now. So wherever you are today, know this, you're not alone. Reach out, take a step back, listen for the whisper of God calling you to take your life back. We want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the Means of Grace podcast. We hope you are having a phenomenal new year already. We encourage you to continue to lean on one another and reach out to us. Let us know what you'd like to hear about. Let us know your story. If you've got a story about burnout that can help someone else, that can help someone who is currently struggling with that, reach out, let us know. We'll share that in our Heart Strangely Warm segment of our podcast. Or if you're just a general fan, give us a like, leave us a comment. Let us know. We love hearing from y'all. And we want to be community with you and for you. So we want to invite you to invite us to be a part of that. So let us know that you're a part of us. Like, share, subscribe. And we're going to continue on in this journey for as long as we can, right? We're going to keep going as long as God calls us to. So if you're struggling with burnout, we encourage you, connect with someone, a counselor, a mentor, or your faith community. And as always, you can find resources on our website. Just go to unccumc.org. You can find all the resources you need, and you'll find resources in our show notes as well. But until next time, stay curious, stay faithful, and remember, even in our emptiness, God is full of grace. See y'all.